Good afternoon. It is the 26th of January 2021. This is another installment on my series on federal law enforcement positions and careers in federal law enforcement. And before I go on to speak about another agency, so far I've spoken about the Federal Air Marshals, the U.S. Marshals, and the United States Secret Service. What I'm going to speak about today is, and in the next couple of videos, before I get to another agency, the process that's involved in hiring an applicant to become a federal law enforcement officer. And the steps are pretty much the same, although they may be conducted in different order. But today what I'm going to speak about is one step that is conducted by every federal law enforcement agency, and that is the background investigation. And I'm also going to speak about a step that is used by most federal law enforcement agencies, and that is the polygraph exam. And again, these investigations and exams are largely the same. It doesn't matter what agency you're applying for. The things that they look for are pretty much going to be the same. The things that disqualify you automatically, pretty much going to be the same. The questions on the polygraph and what that shows, pretty much it's going to be the same. Now, one thing to bear in mind with regards to background investigations and polygraph, there's basically two purposes, first of all, to the background investigation. Number one, as a federal law enforcement agent, you're going to have a security clearance. Now, if you're going to work in the FBI, the Secret Service, the DEA, ICE, and probably ATF, and there's probably a few others, you're going to need to qualify for a top secret clearance, a very high level of clearance, obviously, the highest level of clearance. Now, if you're going, let's say, to the Border Patrol, maybe the United States Marshals, you may not require the same level of clearance on application. You may only require a secret clearance. So if you're applying to be a Border Patrol agent, it's not the same high level of clearance that you would require. Let's say you're going to work in the FBI. Why? Because the FBI has counterintelligence, counterterrorism. You have to have a very, very high level of clearance to have access to that information, whereas in the Border Patrol, you're quite literally going to be arresting people who just cross the border. You're not going to have access to a lot of classified material or have knowledge of that's of use to any foreign power. So that's one thing that you need to keep in mind. The second thing, all agencies, besides determining security clearance eligibility, will determine suitability. Now, a person can be perfectly qualified for a security clearance, but be unsuitable for federal law enforcement employment. So let's say a person has a psychiatric condition and is treatable, and it's admitted or uncovered on the background, that might be perfectly fine, again, for a security clearance, but to carry a firearm, make arrests, be in a stressful situation, might be considered unsuitable. Okay, so what I'm pointing out is the investigation that will be done, the background investigation, and the polygraph exam will look to both areas, basically. And the form that is filled out is the same for every agency. It's the SF Standard Form -86. It can be downloaded on the Office of Personnel Management website, OPM. And again, it's used by all agencies. It's grown in great length over the years. It used to be about 5 pages when I joined DEA. Now it's just pages and pages and pages, and most of it hopefully you don't need to use, but there's a lot there. Okay, who does the investigation? Well, if you're applying to the FBI does its own background investigations. While I was in DEA, initially I was investigated for preemployment by the FBI special agents, because they were going to merge the two agencies. That's since stopped, and then for a long period of time, DEA agents did their own investigations on DEA applicants. Now, at this point in history, I think the Office of Personnel Management contract people do most of the investigations. So that's something that's changed. But again, the scope of the investigation, what they look for, what automatically disqualifies you, what may disqualify you, that really has not changed. And what I'm going to speak first on is the background investigation. And again, a background investigation is simply a look at your life up to this period of time. So number one, make sure you are who you say you are, you know. Number two, to make sure that you're of good character. Number three, to make sure that you are suitable for a law enforcement position. So there's several factors that are the aim of the background investigation. Again, prior to even going to your interview, this will be after you file your application, you get notice that you're going to be interviewed. At that time, you'll be told to complete your SF-86 and submit that. And that will be looked at, and an initial determination will be made, because in some cases they don't have to do an investigation. They can just tell based on the response that the person is not qualified. Okay. Now, coming along with the SF-86, most agencies have a drug use statement that goes beyond what's on the SF-86. The SF-86 is largely concerned with the past 7 years, but I can tell you that law enforcement doesn't care what you did. If it involves illegal drugs or illegal activity, it goes back beyond 7 years, it goes back for your entire lifetime. So they're going to want to know about that, and it's a very specific set of questions. And the one thing I can definitely tell you, all of these agencies, you know, they want you to be, first of all, it's unlawful to be less than completely truthful on this, on any of these forms. And if there is any intentional intent to deceive or mislead or omit information, that will disqualify you. Okay. Now, having said that, let's go into the specific areas. Criminal background. Okay. If you've ever been convicted of a felony, a crime involving any crime, domestic violence, those are absolute disqualifiers. A general court-martial in the military, absolute disqualifier, because that's the equivalent of a felony conviction. Probable disqualifiers, any conviction on any offense that involves drugs or alcohol. Certainly, this is a disqualifier for law enforcement. Any conviction involving moral turpitude. What is moral turpitude? It impacts your honesty. So if you've been arrested and convicted of shoplifting as an adult, you're going to be disqualified, because that information has to be turned over to the defense if you were hired when you go on the witness stand, so that they can impeach your credibility as a witness. So obviously we don't want that. They don't want that. So if you have that type of history, they're not going to even consider you. Okay, that's just the way it is. I would say any arrest for a felony, arrests are going to be looked at in the light of, did you commit the crime, not whether you were convicted of the crime, because the charges may get dismissed for any number of reasons. Perhaps reluctant witnesses, perhaps the prosecutor made a deal with you, whatever it is. But what they're concerned with as an adult is, did you actually do the crime that you were charged with doing? And if the answer is yes, then it's probably going to be treated the same as a conviction. Okay, so let's say a person was picked up at age 18 for want of a better crime. I'm just thinking up something, shoplifting, and the charges were dismissed. What the background investigator is going to do, they're going to interview you, and then they're going to go out and get the file, and they're going to look at it and see, did the person actually commit shoplifting, and the charge may have just been dismissed by the prosecutor because the person went into diversion, pre-trial diversion. If that's the case, you're going to get disqualified in the pre-employment process. They're going to treat it pretty much the same as if it's a conviction. So again, anything involving drug or alcohol abuse that results in arrest. Anything involving moral turpitude, which is honesty. Okay, so you've been convicted of or found to have committed offenses involving honesty, which could involve theft, false official statements, anything like that. It's going to get you disqualified from federal law enforcement. Okay, driving record. Okay, driving record. Any DUIs will knock you out. I think there's really no question about that. Reckless driving within the past several years, any revocation or suspension of your driver's license during your history of your life, probably going to knock you out. Traffic tickets, not so much unless you have a ton of them, or you didn't pay them or something like that, and there's warrants out for you. Um, but they want to make sure that you're a safe driver and that you respect the laws. That's a big thing. Credit history. Okay, if you are in arrears, first thing they're gonna do is run a credit check on you, and if you owe money to various companies and there are judgments against you, you cannot be hired until that is cleared. And this applies also to people who are employed by the Drug Enforcement Administration. For instance, I was a supervisor in DEA, and I had people under my charge, agents who had bad credit, and every 5 years your background comes up for renewal. And they had to get this cleared on their credit report before the government will renew their clearance. So this means, and I would tell them, it's not up to me to get this taken care of. I'm your supervisor. Okay, my job is only to tell you you've got to get this done, or you're going to lose your clearance, you lose your clearance, you lose your job. I don't care whether the debt is valid, whether you say it's invalid. It's on there. It's got to come off of your credit report. You may have to hire a lawyer. You may have to do whatever you've got to do, but I didn't put it on your Experian or Transamerica. It's there, but it's got to be off of there. Okay, so either you got to pay the bill or you've got to work some way to get it removed. But if it's on there, and you owe money to somebody and you haven't paid it, you've gone into default, that's going to be a big problem. Now, why is that a big problem in law enforcement? Number one, in DEA, you come into contact with huge amounts of currency. Number two, we've had even a number of agents disciplined in the past several years, and it's all over corruption, money, either the stealing of money or getting payoffs from just a handful of agents now, but from drug cartels. So drug enforcement, drug law enforcement, there's a lot of money involved in illicit drugs, and so for that reason, they want you to be financially stable. Okay, so that's a big reason for that. Prior employment, they're going to interview your current employer and previous employers. Now, if it's more than a few years since you held a particular job, they would probably just want to look at the file. Now, what they will do is compare your Social Security with what you list on the SF-86. So don't omit any employers, okay? If you just held the job for 2 days and you quit because it sucked, all right, just tell them that. But don't omit it because it's going to come up. And they're going to say, what about this job? We see that they withheld some money for Social Security, but you didn't tell us why, and right away. So now, like anything else, with employers, you're going to get some people who love you, most people who are at least indifferent, and maybe one or two that hate you, depending on how many jobs you've had. That's pretty common anywhere. That's to be expected. Again, I've had to do background investigations on agents back when we did them, when I was a DEA agent, other duties as assigned, and that's to be expected. And a lot of the jobs they had, were just kid type jobs. I remember one girl, I did her investigation when I was assigned up in Maine, and she had worked in a pet hospital. But I had to go out and interview the person. It's like, can I see your file? And said, oh, right here, there's a warning that you'll be fired. And it's just, again, that wasn't a showstopper or anything. It was what it was. But I had to put it down. But most previous employers, when you're trying to get a law enforcement job, are nice. I found that they're nice. They want you to get the job, and they're positive usually. But again, if you have a lot of dismissals or a lot of disciplinary work, or if you were fired for lack of honesty or stealing something, that is going to be a problem. Okay, so again, it's not an automatic, it's a case-by-case thing, but you need a good employment record. Your educational record, they're just going to verify you went to school where you said you went, you got the degree that you said you got, and the grades are what you got, and then they're going to look to see if you were ever disciplined for plagiarism, or I don't know what you can be disciplined for, God knows what on a college campus, but they're going to look at that as well. Military service, your DD-214 will be submitted along with your application. I would say if you have a fully honorable discharge, you're good. Okay. Now, if you have anything, certainly if you have a dishonorable, bad conduct, dismissal other than honorable, that is a showstopper. You're out. You're not going to be considered. Matter of fact, you cannot even really be considered for a lot of federal jobs, non-law enforcement. So a punitive discharge or a bad administrative discharge will knock you out. Now, suppose you have a general discharge. It probably will knock you out. Okay, a general discharge is less than honorable. It means you were basically thrown out, but you weren't thrown out under the worst conditions. What about an entry-level separation? Probably will knock you out, but it depends. You know, if you went to boot camp and you were there 3 weeks and you had an allergic reaction to some garbage they fed you in the mess hall and they gave you an ELS, that may not knock you out. But on the other hand, if you just couldn't adapt to military discipline, you know, and let's say you were 18 and now you're 24, they're probably not going to want you. That's just realistic. There's a lot of applicants, and that it is what it is. So I would say anything less than a fully honorable discharge. Now they're going to look at your military record. They're going to look at, in the Marine Corps, it's page 11. I don't know what page it is in your other service records, your disciplinary record, if you have one. I would say any court-martial convictions that you had, that will probably be a showstopper, because again, a court-martial conviction is a federal court conviction. So if you spent time in the brig, even if you got an honorable discharge, you're probably going to be disqualified, almost certainly. Now, what about Article 15s? Now, if you're in the military, you know what an Article 15 is. It's office hours, captain's mast, NJP. They call it all different things. It's an administrative sanction. And the SF-86 asks if you've had this in the last 7 years. And after that, they're not really that concerned. But they will look at it. And, you know, for me, it wasn't a problem. I had 2 Article 15s, one in the Navy and one in the Marines. And, you know, they laughed about it. But this was at a time, this was in the mid-'80s, and most of the guys who were in the agency were Vietnam War veterans. Today, most people who go into federal law enforcement don't know anything about the military. They don't know about any of the chicken crap that you have to put up with in the military. They don't know what it's like to be an enlisted man in the military. And they just see that charge on there. It's going to be different than what it was years ago, when you had lots of people running the agency and in the agency who are familiar with the military. So an Article 15 might be something that affects you today. The other thing they will look at is your medical record to see if you have any psychiatric, psychological issues or medical issues that would disqualify you. So that's it for your, basically your military history, your employment, your education, your credit, your driving, arrest records. They're also going to interview references, and then they're going to ask the reference for several people who know you. They're going to go around your neighborhood and ask, you know, do you have loud parties? Do you create problems? That sort of thing. And hopefully you don't. Usually, you know, they come by even to my house still for neighbors I've got who are in law enforcement. And, you know, fact of the 21st century, a lot of times we don't even know our neighbors that well, you know, but say, I can tell you what I can tell you, you know. So they're going to look at that. Basically what they're looking at is your character as a whole, and the background investigation results are part of a picture. And again, there isn't a whole lot you can do about your background. You can get in shape for the physical fitness test. You can learn how to properly prepare your resume, your federal application for your knowledge, skills, and abilities. You can prepare for certain things you can't prepare for. And the background investigation, there's either something in your background that's going to knock you out or there isn't. And the chances are, if you think it's very questionable, you know, it's probably going to knock you out, realistically, because again, there are a lot of applicants. So if you have something that's you know, certainly arrest records and things like that, I've almost never heard of anyone who's ever got into at least a major law enforcement agency with that type of thing. So hopefully that's useful with backgrounds. Now, to supplement the backgrounds, most federal agencies now do polygraphs, as do state and local agencies. And the purpose of the polygraph is really threefold. Number one, to ensure that you're telling the truth, because a background investigation only shows what it shows. So if you have undetected drug use, illegal drug use, you know, that was never caught by anybody, they're not going to know that from a background necessarily, unless you're notoriously a stoner, okay? Number two, it's going to detect undetected crime. You know, if you've ever committed crimes and gotten away with them, especially, you know, if you're stealing or something, or a law enforcement officer who is doing things that you shouldn't be doing on duty, they're going to want to know about that. They're going to want to know if you're a pervert, okay, quite honestly, because, again, that may not show up on your background. Again, backgrounds show what they show. And those things would tend to show only if you've been arrested or convicted. Now, as an agent, I supervised polygraphers, DEA polygraphers, and I can just say most of the polygraphs that are given in DEA, and I presume other agencies, are to applicants. Very rarely is it a criminal suspect. It's almost always the pre-employment applicants. And I will say what Richard Nixon said. I don't know whether they work or not, but they scare the hell out of people. Okay? And you'd be shocked at what people fess up to before they even take the exam. Shocked. I mean, so that's why I support it to a certain extent, because even though I don't really like the idea of a polygraph, I would not want these people to come on the agency, and they would have gotten on the agency had they not fessed up to what they fessed up to. And some of the things they fess up to include, and not limited to, having sold drugs in college. Not just used drugs, sold drugs in college, okay? You can't have that person in the DEA, okay? Or in any law enforcement job. I don't care if it was only pot, you can't have him. There are many things in the world he can probably do. I hope he's doing them, but that is not one of them. Bizarre sexual practices, to include activities with things that don't have two legs. Yeah, at least two of them admitted it. I won't tell you, because cops have bad, and also church deacons, so I'm not supposed to go into detail, so I'm not going to go into any detail on it. But these exams were 15 years ago, and I hope the people moved on and found better things to do with their time. But yeah, they didn't get hired, okay? So what kind of things that will knock out a person on a polygraph? Well, they're going to ask very detailed about illicit drug use. And any illicit drug use, right now the current standard in DEA, and it's pretty much the same for any federal agency, in the last 3 years will knock you out, period. So it doesn't matter if you just smoked marijuana once at a party 2.5 years ago, you're out. You cannot have it. It's in the last 3 years, period. Now, it doesn't matter if your state legalized marijuana, because that doesn't matter, because marijuana is illegal in all 50 states under federal law. And secondly, we don't want to issue guns and badges to people who use dope. So that's it. You know, you may like it, you may not like it, but that's the way it is, you know. And also during your career, you're going to be subject to random, unannounced urinalysis, and if you're found to be having used illegal drugs, you're fired. That's the automatic penalty. They'll offer you rehabilitation, but you get fired. They'll offer you drug rehab, but you get fired from the job. No ifs, ands, or buts, no second chance. And I think it's pretty much the same thing in the military now, too. When I was in the military, they didn't do that, but starting in the mid-'80s, and it's very good that they did that. They give all the drug users administrative discharges, which has positive on urinalysis. So that's a good thing, because those people created a lot of problems in the military. What if your drug use was more than 3 years ago? Well, if it was experimental use of marijuana, and it was between 3 and 10 years, again, it would have to be experimental use. And that kind of differs, probably just a few times. And that's it. If it was regular use or heavy use, you're going to be disqualified. I don't care how far back you go. Any hard drug use, experimental use, less than 10 years ago will knock you out, which case that's just about everybody. Because the maximum age to get in the law enforcement, federal law enforcement, got to be hired before your 37th birthday. So let's say you're 31, you can go back to 20. So maybe somebody did something when they were 18, okay, once, okay. Again, experimental. Any hard use, regular drug use, certainly if you were selling it, you're done for. You're not going to pass, okay. How accurate is the polygraph, okay? This is a matter of great question. It's as accurate as the examiner is qualified. So if you have a highly qualified examiner, if they've gone to the Defense Department School at Fort Benning, that's about as best as you can get. That's what's used by the CIA, that's what's used by National Security Agency, Secret Service, DEA, FBI. That's where we send ours. Now, if they're trained somewhere else, it may be no more valid than the flip of a coin. A big problem, I think, is not, a big problem is false positives, but unfortunately, if you are shown to have a significant response to a relevant question, and on a polygraph, there's 3 types of questions. There's the irrelevant question, the control question, and the relevant question. The irrelevant question, is my name James Benesek? Yes. Presumably I'm not lying about that. Maybe I am. If they don't know that, then they're really in trouble. But presumably you're not going to lie, so they're going to see what a truthful response looks like. And then they're going to ask a control question where they expect you to lie. Have you ever told a major lie to your significant other? Most people have, and they just want to see what a nervous response looks like. And then the relevant questions. Have you ever stolen from an employer? Have you ever used drugs while employed as a law enforcement officer or a member of the military or in a position of trust? If the answer is, of course, if the answer is yes to that, you'd be disqualified. But if you answer no but show significant response to that, they're going to consider that as a significant response, and you'll be disqualified from taking or from holding the job for 3 years. If the examiner accuses you of showing significant countermeasures, attempted countermeasures, and I won't get into what they are, but the examiner is trained to try to look for countermeasures. If they think that you're trying to beat the test, you're going to be disqualified for 3 years, even if you were truthful. That's just the way it is. So significant response to a relevant question, countermeasures, you're disqualified for 3 years. If you're found to have lied on a polygraph, you're disqualified for good. So how do you lie? Well, at the beginning they give you a very detailed interview, and they ask you everything in detail, and then they narrow it down to yes and no questions, except for what you have told me already. Have you ever done X, Y, or Z? Yes or no. Okay. If you're a law enforcement officer, they want to know if you ever lied on the witness stand. Yes or no. Have you ever taken a bribe? Yes or no. Have you ever shown up for work under the influence of alcohol? Yes or no. Okay. These are things they want to know because they're important to know. Okay. Now, if you said, well, I took a free meal from McDonald's, okay. Besides that, you walked in your uniform and they gave you a free meal so that BLM doesn't throw a brick through the door or something. They do that. That's different, okay? They're going to say, besides what you've told me, have you ever taken anything of value from a member of the public in exchange for doing or not doing your job, which is the definition of bribery, and that's what they're going to be looking for. So again, the polygraph, I'm not going to get into anything in detail on it. I have my own opinions about it. But again, as Richard Nixon said, I don't know whether they work or not, but they scare the hell out of people. And again, if you're found to have a significant response to a relevant question or showing countermeasures, according to the examiner, you'll be DQed for 3 years. And that applies, I think, DEA, FBI, Secret Service. I don't know about ICE. I don't know what their policy is. I know my own agency's policy because I keep up on it. But I presume it's pretty much the same, and I think the same applies to the Border Patrol. I do not know if the marshals polygraph their applicants. That I don't know. I know the Bureau of Prisons does not polygraph prison guards, but prison guards have a huge turnover. I don't know about the Federal Air Marshal Service. Now, what are some things on background investigations that will knock you out in one agency and not another? Okay, if you're applying to the FBI and your wife is a foreign national, let's say she's a national of the People's Republic of China, that's a problem. Okay, that's a problem because she has relatives in a foreign country who could be threatened. Now, if you're applying to the Border Patrol and your wife is a national of the People's Republic of China awaiting citizenship, probably it's not a big deal at all. Okay? The Chinese don't care about turning Border Patrol agents, but they do care about turning FBI agents. So again, you have to consider what agency it is you're applying for. Some are going to have much more strict requirements than others. They're going to want to know about any foreign travel you've ever done. Okay, they're going to want to know. They're going to ask questions, and also in the polygraph about infiltration. You know, has anyone told you to put in for this job? Is anyone paying you to put in for this job? Because again, the drug cartels would love to infiltrate the DEA. That's just the way it is. So, what better way than to have an agent? You know, so. Hopefully this has been of some use. So if you've been in trouble as a young man or young woman, it depends what type of trouble, what the sanctions were, whether you got caught, and it's also you're gonna have to go through a polygraph exam for most federal law enforcement agencies. My next installment will be on the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and what we'll do is we will take a position, the United States Marshal's position, Deputy U.S. Marshal, and I'm going to show you how to write up a federal application with, a mythical applicant, and show you how to write up the knowledge, skills, and abilities so that you make you're able to articulate your experience so that you can be hired. Okay, so the do's and don'ts of that, because that is really one of the things that you can improve on, and whether you do it correctly or not depends whether you get to any other step, because that's the first thing they look at. Okay, hope this was enjoyable and somewhat informative, and I'll look for you on the next series. Thank you.